There are people in your life who seem almost impossibly strong, the kind of people who never complain, never break down, never admit that something is wrong. They show up smiling. They handle everything alone. And if you ask them how they are doing, the answer is always the same: I'm fine, nothing to worry about. And at first it seems admirable, but psychology says there is often a hidden story behind people who never show their problems, a story built quietly over years, where the brain learns that expressing pain does not bring comfort, it brings risk. Research shows that when someone repeatedly hides their struggles, it is rarely because they have none. It is usually because somewhere in their past they learned that vulnerability was unsafe. Maybe they asked for help once and were ignored. Maybe they showed emotion and were judged or dismissed, and slowly the brain forms a protective rule that says keep everything inside because showing pain only makes things worse. Your brain is constantly trying to protect you from emotional danger, and one powerful defense mechanism is emotional suppression. This happens when someone consciously or unconsciously pushes their feelings down instead of expressing them, and psychology says people who grow up feeling that their emotions are inconvenient or burdensome often become experts at hiding everything, even when they are struggling deeply. Think about the person who is always the strong one in the group, the one who solves everyone's problems, who listens to everyone else, who offers advice and support but never talks about their own pain. This pattern is sometimes called the strong friend phenomenon, and research shows these people often feel that if they fall apart, even once, the entire emotional structure around them might collapse. For many of these people, the habit started very early in childhood. Psychology calls this emotional conditioning, where a child learns through repeated experiences which emotions are safe to show and which ones must stay hidden. And if a child grows up in an environment where vulnerability is ignored, mocked, or punished, the brain adapts by building an identity around independence and silence. Your brain does something interesting. In these situations, it begins to associate self-reliance with safety and dependence with danger. So, instead of reaching out when life becomes overwhelming, the mind automatically shifts into survival mode, where the person thinks, I will handle it alone because that feels more predictable than risking disappointment or rejection. Another psychological concept that explains this behavior is avoidant attachment. Theory suggests that the way people relate to others in adulthood is shaped by their early relationships, and people with avoidant attachment often learned early that relying on others was unreliable, so they become emotionally self-sufficient even when they secretly crave support. If you know someone who never shows their problems, you might notice something interesting about them. They rarely talk about their feelings, but they are incredibly good at understanding other people's emotions. This happens because when someone spends years observing others, instead of expressing themselves, their emotional awareness becomes extremely sharp. Research shows that emotionally reserved people often develop high levels of empathy because they have spent so much time studying human behavior. They know how people feel, they know how people react, and they know exactly what others need. Yet when it comes to their own struggles, they remain silent. Part of the reason is something psychologists call the burden belief, which is the quiet assumption that sharing problems will make other people's lives harder. So the person convinces themselves that staying silent is actually a form of kindness. They think everyone else already has enough to deal with, so my problems should stay with me. You might hear them say things like, it's not a big deal, or I'll figure it out, or others have it worse. And these phrases sound humble, but psychology says they often hide a deeper belief that their pain does not deserve attention. And over time, this belief becomes part of their identity. Another powerful factor is emotional independence, which on the surface looks like strength, but research shows that extreme independence can sometimes develop as a trauma response. When someone repeatedly experiences disappointment or abandonment, the brain begins to rely only on itself because depending on others feels too uncertain. Your brain loves certainty, even if that certainty is isolation. And for someone who has been let down before, the safest emotional strategy becomes handling everything alone, because if you expect nothing from others, you cannot be hurt by them. Many people who hide their struggles also carry a strong sense of responsibility. Psychology calls this hyper responsibility, where someone feels personally accountable for maintaining stability around them, so they become the calm voice in chaos, the problem solver, the emotional anchor. But the quiet truth is that constantly Being the strong one can become exhausting. When a person always supports others but never allows themselves to be supported, emotional fatigue slowly builds beneath the surface like pressure behind a closed door. Research shows that suppressing emotions does not actually eliminate them. Instead, the brain stores that emotional energy internally, and over time it can appear in subtle ways: irritability, overthinking, unexplained stress, or sudden emotional shutdowns. You may notice that people who never show their problems often withdraw. When life becomes difficult, they disappear. For a while, they stop replying to messages. They become quiet and distant. This is not because they do not care. It is because their brain has learned to process pain privately. Psychologists refer to this as emotional withdrawal, a coping strategy where someone retreats inward to regain control over overwhelming feelings. And for them, solitude becomes a safe place where no one expects explanations. Interestingly, research also shows that people who hide their struggles often appear extremely calm during crises because their brains are used to managing intense emotions. Internally, they have practiced emotional control for years. This is why in difficult situations, they may look composed while everyone else panics, but what others cannot see is the quiet emotional cost of always carrying everything alone. Another psychological pattern involved is perfectionism. Many people who hide their problems believe they must always appear capable because somewhere along the way they learned that being imperfect could lead to criticism, rejection, or disappointment. So they carefully protect the image of being fine even when they are not, because maintaining that image feels safer than revealing the messy reality of human struggle. Your brain also develops something psychologists call emotional filtering, where a person automatically minimizes their own pain while amplifying other people's problems. They genuinely believe their struggles are smaller, less important, or less worthy of attention. If you listen closely, you will hear them dismiss their own experiences with phrases like, "It's nothing," or "I'll deal with it later." But psychology says constant emotional dismissal slowly disconnects people from their own needs. Over time, they become so used to ignoring their feelings that recognizing them becomes difficult. The brain simply keeps moving forward, focusing on responsibilities, tasks, and other people's problems. Yet behind this silence, there is often a deep emotional world. People who rarely express their struggles tend to think deeply about life, about relationships, about meaning, and because they process everything internally, their reflections can be incredibly rich. They may not speak often about their pain, but when they do, it usually reveals layers of understanding, empathy, and emotional insight that surprise the people around them. Psychology also suggests that many of these individuals are highly self-aware because spending so much time with their own thoughts creates a strong internal dialogue where they analyze experiences, feelings, and motivations. But even with this awareness, the habit of silence can remain powerful because the brain prefers familiar patterns, and if someone has spent years believing that their problems are theirs alone, changing that belief can feel uncomfortable. What many people do not realize is that those who appear the strongest are often the ones who have simply practiced hiding their struggles the longest, and strength does not always mean the absence of pain. Sometimes it simply means learning how to carry it quietly. Research shows that emotional connection is one of the most important factors for psychological well-being because humans are naturally wired for social support, and when people consistently suppress their struggles, they unintentionally limit the very connections that could help them heal. Your brain releases calming chemicals like oxytocin when you share emotions with someone who listens and understands, which means opening up is not weakness, it is actually a biological way your mind restores balance. But for someone who has spent years being the strong one, vulnerability feels unfamiliar, almost like speaking a language they never learned, even though part of them quietly hopes someone will notice the weight they carry. Sometimes all it takes is one safe conversation, one moment where someone listens without judgment, for the brain to slowly realize that sharing pain does not always lead to rejection. And when that realization begins, something powerful happens. The person who once believed they had to carry everything alone slowly discovers that being human does not mean being invincible. It means allowing others to see the parts of you that are still healing.